And welcome back to Think Global, Do Justice. Hope you guys are doing well. My name is Brandon Stiver. Great to be with you guys again. Excited for this conversation. I had the chance to connect with this Christian leader and author a few months ago and just familiarize myself with his work. And I think he's doing some stuff in an interesting spot. So excited to get into this interview today. Before I do, want to give a shout out to our partners at the Accord Network. Grateful for the work that they're doing to support leaders throughout the world. Definitely click the link in our show notes. Of course, the One Accord conference is coming up later this year. You can register for that. They have community groups. They have all sorts of resources. Definitely check out the Accord Network, and our gratitude to Michael Cerna and the whole team over there. I'm excited to get into this conversation today. I'm joined by JD Bauman, who is the executive director at Christians for Impact and co-author of this new book, which for our YouTube, All the Lives You Can Change, Effective Altruism for Christians. JD wrote this along with Dominic Roser and David Zhang. And I thought this was an interesting topic. So I'm excited to jump in. So JD, thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in this topic. I want to talk effective altruism, but also kind of want to just learn a little bit more about you, your background, the work of Christians for Impact. What kind of led you into this work, of supporting global change?
Well, it really all starts with my faith upbringing. So I love Jesus and I want to be more like Jesus in every aspect of my life, and was raised in a very Christian household. My parents were missionaries, met doing missions in Western Europe. Very comfortable place to do missions, I suppose, although my mom did have a foray as a Bible smuggler before the wall fell in Soviet Russia. But no, I grew up in the US and was always asking questions about how could I serve best God's kingdom? How can I use my limited resources, my time, my money to do good? And for a while, I thought I would be a teacher. For a stint, I worked in New York City as a gold broker. And that's when I learned about effective altruism, which has a lot of surprising insights about how we can do good today. Effective altruism is just this idea of using evidence and reason to find the best ways to do good and then to take action on that basis. I learned that some of the best ways to do good through charity, saving lives, for instance, there are ways to do it tens or hundreds of times more effective per dollar. And that just seems like too good of an opportunity for Christians to leave on the table, or to leave up to secular folk that might take the numbers and run away with it. That's too good. We need, as Christians, to carefully consider this as well.
Yeah. I'm excited to jump into that. Your mom was smuggling Bibles in Europe. That's not something you hear every day. So what countries was your family in when you guys were doing missions? And then were you born over there? Did you live over there as a kid? Tell me a little bit more about that missions background.
My childhood is a little more stateside. So my parents met in Belgium with Operation Mobilization under George Verver, doing evangelism throughout Europe. And after they got married and sort of settled down in the US, my dad deepened his programming skills. And a lot of people don't know this, but what many missions organizations need isn't more people on the ground from America. They need people who have technical skills, people who can work the IT systems or database architects like my dad, or they need people who have money who can donate to support missions. So the greatest need actually for my family was to be in Orlando, Florida. So that's where my father served at Wycliffe Bible Translators for 25 years. And that's where I grew up. It was a Christian bubble. And we could talk more about that, but that's sort of how I got there.
Okay, so are you an Orlando Magic fan?
It's funny, they became big sort of when I was a teenager. They weren't so huge before then. I'm not much of a sports guy myself. I always felt a bit awkward in Sunday school when all the other chaps would talk about the latest football games, and I would just want to talk about philosophy and theology. I don't know, maybe you can relate.
Well, no, I go for both. Yeah, and I love Shaq and Penny back in the 90s. So, yeah, before Shaq came over to my team, which is the Lakers. So, Before we were chatting, before we hit record, JD, we were talking even just a little bit about your own, not just your own Christian background from your family, but also the churches that you're a part of. We talked about Anabaptism. I think you go to a Mennonite church. You mentioned a moment ago. How does some of that kind of feed into your desire to affect change? When we think about, nonprofit work, how does some of your own kind of like church background, theological underpinning kind of speak to that?
I think the deeper I've walked into faith, down the path of faith, the more I've realized it's about becoming like Jesus. It's about becoming like God, the God man, Christ, right? And every area of our life becoming more and more like Jesus. And I think the Anabaptists understand this. I think they've gotten this right. And so the self-giving love of Christ, this pacifistic ethic, this radically generous, radically serving ethic that is so everyday in many Anabaptist communities, at least in the speech of Anabaptists, to me was just wildly attractive. And that was something I'd seen in my grandparents and great-grandparents who were missionaries in India and medical doctors in India, Anabaptists doing that. And I think sometimes it's a bit confusing as a Christian in quote unquote Christian West today. How do you embody that radical service and generosity when folks like Anabaptists or like the early Christians were actually extreme minorities in their communities? The earliest Christians were kind of the weird ones who fetched the babies out of the trash cans, who loved and served their neighbors, who didn't love and serve them, who were a minority, even persecuted for their faith. The West today is very different. And so a lot of what I've had to do is wrestle with, okay, what does it mean as a upper middle class American in, Christian America to live radically like Jesus? And what does that mean for my money, for my time? Instead of just going to church on Sunday and saying the prayer, what does it look like for this to affect my diet, my career choice, my giving? And ultimately that led to a vocation in the nonprofit space where, based on the gifts God had given me and the opportunities in the world, I saw an exciting opportunity to partner with God in his mission to help Christians give more effectively and also to pursue careers with a radical impact for the kingdom. So that's what I do in my day-to-day. I do a lot of philanthropic advising, and I also do career advising. So we advise through Christians for Impact for free, several hundred Christians per year to discern careers that tackle pressing global issues like extreme global poverty, climate change, or missions. Many people in their 20s have so much time and so much ahead of them and don't have the discernment to know how can they actually link up their limited gifts and resources, not just to make some difference, but to make the greatest possible difference for the kingdom and for the lives of others.
Yeah, I'm totally tracking with you. I've thought about this myself, and I've heard with some people that I grew up in a Baptist church, and I even had to kind of think through what are the primary differences here? And as I in college started to study some of the Anabaptist traditions, it was really a draw to the kind of, and when we say Anabaptist, I know people are like, what is that even? It's like Mennonites and even Amish, those types of denominations. Now, those are not the only ones. Those are just the most well-known ones, right?
Well, you're rocking the Mennonite beard here.
I know, right? I look like I could be a Mennonite.
I didn't shave today, so I felt bad about it. But that's just going back to my Mennonite roots, really.
I have enough beard for both of us, JD. Yeah, but when we think about those traditions, you can kind of see the setting up of an alternate type of society to one degree or another, right? And there are gradients in terms of that, but that was what drew me. And I very much resonate even just kind of in your description regarding we are out there promoting the kingdom of God, which is different than the powers that oversee the land that we live in, or even some of these lands, obviously, that we're seeking to impact. So that's always been a draw for me. I appreciate the way that you articulated that. How long has Christians for Impact been around?
We've been around for 4 years. So
okay.
We've hit the ground running. We have a primary project, which is Effective Altruism for Christians. That's the Christian community within the global Effective Altruism movement. But we've really scaled up our career advising about 2 years ago is when we started. We also do conferences. So we bring together kind of like a court conferences, but a little bit more individual focused rather than organization focused. We bring together Christians who are also very interested in effectiveness and optimization, trying to find the best ways to do good with their careers and their giving. We had the Archbishop of Canterbury actually just 2 days before he stepped down, the former one, not Sarah, but Justin.
That's awesome. When you're engaging with people, who are these, like a lot of college age or like recent college grads that are connecting with you guys?
So I would say our average applicant for our advising or attendee at our conference, more or less the same, is somebody um, who's maybe in their upper 20s, someone who's been around the block a bit in terms of starting their career, figuring out what they're good at, and realizing that, this dream of just making partner at a consulting firm just isn't all that it's chalked up to be. Or even this idea that they had for making an impact with their career in a nonprofit when they were young and idealistic and ambitious. Maybe they were a bit naive about exactly how nonprofits work and how it is that large institutions do or don't change, and maybe are asking questions about how can I pivot into something even more impactful. So a lot of them are highly educated Christians in their 20s who want to make that transition. Or, we do have a fair number of folks in their sort of 40s who are a bit more settled and who are discerning where to give most effectively. We have a fundraiser that we've raised close to, now it's been over $600,000 for, raising money for some of the world's most effective charities at saving lives in Jesus' name. So groups like Against Malaria Foundation, which provide insecticide-treated bed nets all throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And this costs about 100 times less than what it costs to treat the most preventable diseases in the West. If you just think globally and do justice, you can actually have 100 times more impact if you do it thoughtfully.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. And it kind of leads me to, what we really want to dive into. When we talk about effective altruism, you've said that you've heard this before. And when you and I connected on a call a couple months ago, I brought it up and you were probably tired of having to speak to this. But the reality is effective altruism to a Westerner is in some regards indelibly connected to Sam Bankman-Fried. Not really ideal, considering everything that happened with his cryptocurrency exchange and just all of that. But that was the whole thing. In fact, I remember I was working for a global nonprofit a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and a good friend of mine that was also on staff, his name's David, he sent me this video. And it was like some YouTuber or whatever that was like, check this guy out. And it was like all about this guy living in the Caribbean and, doing this crypto and making a bunch of money. And it was all in the name of effective altruism. And it was Sam Bankman-Fried. Well, as we all know, he's been arrested and, there was fraud and there was all of that. So I say all of that not because it has anything to do with you necessarily, other than these waters have been a little sullied in a way in terms of because altruism as a term has been around forever, right? But effective altruism is like a specific approach to that, giving, right? And that altruistic activity. So if we could, I would love if you could just give us the rundown what effective altruism is, unsully the waters,
Sure.
because it's
Rewrite
not
the
just
story.
about some, yeah, it's not just about some corrupt guy that went sideways. It's really about an opportunity, right? And specifically for us, for believers. So give us a rundown. What's effective altruism all about?
Well, it begins with this simple idea that if we're trying to do good, we shouldn't just do whatever feels good or just simply follow our intentions blindly. We know that sometimes people with the best intentions can form charities that actually don't have much impact, or worse, sometimes they have a negative impact, right? I grew up going to DARE classes, drug and alcohol resistant education classes. They would warn us, actually scare us about what would happen to you if you use drugs. And I'm certainly not for using drugs, right? But there was actually a randomized control trial, a very high-powered study that went into seeing if a program like DARE actually had some effect on people's drug use in the future. And it actually showed that the program was wildly ineffective. We'd recruited millions of school children to bring them into these classes to hear these education, and they never actually had a lower drug use. So that's just all too common in the nonprofit world. And those of us who have worked in nonprofits understand that oftentimes the best of intentions don't lead to best outcomes. When helping hurts, and Brian Fickert will tell you about that. Sometimes it leads to negative consequences, like in the Tom's Shoes example, right? Everyone loves to pick on Tom's Shoes, right? And as a Christian, this shouldn't be surprising. We know that our hearts are deceptive, right? Who can understand it? I think the prophet Jeremiah says. And there's no telling how far some of the fallenness of the world can corrupt even the best of intentions and the best of efforts. So effective altruism is really trying to reclaim good intentions by not just praising good intentions and feel-good volunteerism and throwing your efforts and time into a void, but really saying, okay, let's love others with our heart and our mind. Let's bring in data and evidence to finding the best ways to do good, especially in a global age. In a global age, in global times, we need data and evidence to hear the stories of people we don't see every day. I live in Alexandria, in Virginia, in a relatively privileged neighborhood. I don't see the faces and the names of people who are living in extreme poverty, who feel stepped on, who feel forgotten, who aren't visited by my church on our mission trips, right? Data and evidence are part of the pictures we have into the stories of people who are suffering from preventable diseases, who haven't heard the gospel on the other side of the world in the 1040 window, right? And these people matter just as much to God. So the story of how effective altruism as a movement came about is when in the 2000s, folks in Oxford started to realize, especially Toby Ord and Will MacAskill, these are philosophy professors at the University of Oxford, started to realize that evidence in the global health space shows that the most effective global health interventions are not just a little bit better than average. They're actually tens to hundreds of times more impactful than average. One example that's often given is this story of guide dogs. It's a UK charity, and it's a wonderful charity. They provide seeing eye dogs for people who are sight impaired, and it takes a while to train the dog. After all said and done, it costs roughly, according to their website, upwards of $50,000 to $80,000 to train a seeing eye dog.
Just one.
Now,
Wow.
Just one seeing eye dog. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So it's funny that you mentioned this. We used to raise seeing eye dogs growing up through 4-H in California,
Whoa.
where I'm from. So I don't know. I don't think we were spending that much, and several of ours failed the program. So
you know better than I do. I imagine it's like a lot of the dogs fail the program. A lot of the trainers, you have to think of the whole overhead, right? Like, given how much the charity costs to run, if their primary program is guide dogs, just do simple division, right? Overhead divided by outcomes, what's the cost per outcome? And by their own accounts, it costs roughly between like $50,000 and $80,000. You can check the website, but quite a lot of money to train a seeing eye dog. I want to hear all your stories about this in a second, like what that was like for you. While that's a good thing to do, around the world right now, there are individuals suffering from trachoma, which is this disease where your eyelid will grow inward and it will scratch your eye. And over time, that causes blindness. But it's very preventable. We know how to treat it. It costs roughly $50 to treat trachoma. And so for the cost of one seeing eye dog, we can restore sight to about 1,000 people. And so this is an example that someone like Toby Ord wants to point to and say, look, it's clear that one of these is more impactful than the other. In fact, it might even be a disservice to those we're serving. He would say it certainly is, if we're talking about doing good with our money or the most good we can, and yet we keep settling for guide dogs when we could be funding trachoma treatments.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example, because now the kind of question becomes, when people are raising a guide dog, it is there's an emotional element for the person that's raising them, and then when those dogs go to their own community, these are just kind of these almost intangible but very clear drivers, towards why they're doing that. How do you overcome the fact that, like, that some of this, even doing good, is a little self-interested.
In the book, we make the case that Christians who want to see the world as God sees it and who want to have the heart that God has for the world should move in the direction of being more impartial, of seeing those neglected and marginalized persons in global communities that we are in a position to serve. And not shying away from those problems, but trusting that God has placed us in this time and place to be able to influence them and to make the best use of our resources to do that. We don't make the case that we should never support our local communities, that we do not say that there's no duties we have to our next door neighbors. But we think that in a day and age, in the US, for instance, where it's estimated roughly 96% of American dollars donated to Christian charities stay within the US, that when that's actually the case, even though the overwhelming need is globally, we should be moving in the direction of more impartiality and also of more effectiveness. If you have a choice between helping tens or hundreds of times as many people made in God's image who matter just as much to God, and you choose not to help them, then I think there should be a really good reason, because I think one day we're all going to have to own up for what we did and give an account, just as the stewards in the biblical parables will have to give an account to our master, to God, with what we've done with the resources that he's given us. So that's the case we argue for. It's not that local relationships don't matter. They obviously do, right? And anyone who's a friend or a father or a church member understands that those relationships are holy and sacred. But it's not the case that if we gave more globally and more effectively, that we would somehow cease to care for our next door neighbor or cease to be a good husband or a good father. When, in fact, by giving globally, we can enable more of those relationships even. We can save the lives of children for fathers who would have lost their children to malaria. We can provide sight for blind mothers who would have otherwise lost it from trachoma. We can provide justice at scale in ways that we maybe couldn't have done in our backyard, where it's much more gridlocked and much more polarized. So that's what we would argue for this.
Yeah, no, I love it, dude. And it's a compelling and it's a challenging approach. Now, probably not for this audience, because we have people that are coming from missions and global nonprofit space and like so forth. But I think to the average person, that is a challenging approach in terms of like, I'm going to prioritize these people more than those in my own community, or try to get more bang for my buck, kind of, so to speak. I'm just kind of curious, as you guys have, these people have good intentions, but there's also this need to kind of challenge some of these ineffective charitable, practices. What do you kind of see on that front? Like, we have the site example. That's an interesting one. What are some other charitable practices that you're like, this is not really effective?
Yeah. So there are all kinds of examples. I'm trying to think of the best ones. So one might just be saving lives, right? The average cost to save, the statistical value of saving a life, the number that the US government is willing to spend to prevent a death in the continental US approaches, I think, $7 million. There's estimates on official US government websites. But there's actually an official number of what the US government will pay through its infrastructure services, through its health services, in order to prevent a death in expectation. And it's roughly around $7 million. We know right now through GiveWell, which is a leading charity evaluator in the global health and poverty space, that it costs roughly on average $5,000 to prevent some sort of death from malaria, from whooping cough in countries like Nigeria or in Kenya. So right there, you have a difference of roughly 1,000 times what it costs. So I wouldn't say that, for instance, providing nets under the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge is a priori just a bad thing to do because it's so expensive. The nets might cost $100 million, but maybe you save 50 or 100 lives. I haven't done the research into that specifically. It sounds like a good thing to do, right? But if you're asking the question that we ask in the book, which is, how can I do the most good with my limited resources? Which I think is one of the things that Jesus asks us to consider, in perhaps in different words. But read the stewardship parables, and I'm curious what you think. If we're asking that question, how can I do the most good? It's probably not going to lead us towards those really expensive Western interventions. It's going to lead us globally. It's going to lead us to evidence-backed interventions that are recommended by groups like GiveWell, and might even lead us to pursue careers that support those organizations, that create new organizations like that, that lobby for funding for organizations like that. It's challenging in one's own life to not get cynical. Yeah, I'm in the DC area, and people say in the DC area, after 5 years, everyone just gets cynical. Everybody starts seeing all the tit for tat strategies, all of the networking, all of the deals that people make and break. And it's easy to come here idealistic, and after 5, 10+ years, just feel really cynical about it all and how the way that the world works. And I think as a Christian, it's very easy for many reasons to get cynical, and also as an effective altruist as well, to see things that aren't as effective as you would like. But I don't think God calls us to be campaigning against things as much as he calls us to live for Christ and to live for the kingdom and to speak healing and justice and peace. Jesus says that judge lest you be judged, right? I don't see it as my place to judge the hearts of those who are leading ineffective charities. Now, those aren't the charities I would want to give to or work for. And I do believe many of them have great intentions. But all that I can do is give the best account of what I've been given. And I think it's helpful to also remember that, like, the world is a complicated place, right? In any given intervention, it's not always clear what the most effective strategy is. I don't think that's a free pass for not investigating. But in some places where it's quite messy, like we have a report on our website about human trafficking. That's a place where it's just really quite messy. We don't have good evidence about what works best. It seems like there's going to be a lot of actors in this space. A lot of people are trying their best. And currently, we just don't have a clear sense in the fog of war of what's actually winning the battle.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Well, I am curious what you think about the stewardship passages. For instance, when the parable of the talents, where Jesus gives the master gives 3 different servants talents, and he comes back and asks them to give an account of their management, right? Where do you see that meshing or maybe not meshing with effective altruism?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think through. So, okay, yeah, the story of the 3 servants that each get a different number of talents. To me, I basically look at that, and if you compare the person who had 5 versus the person that got 2, there's really no difference other than the amount, right? But in terms of God's response to them, the master's response to them, it's just about their faithfulness. So they also took risk, and I think risk is actually a part of that parable. So to me, the primary, those would be the 2 things. And it's interesting because you've heard people say, like, faith is spelled RASK. So I do think that risk is actually an aspect to it, because being faithful to God requires you to be dependent on God. And that means you're not dependent on yourself, right? So you have to take risks. And you kind of get the sense that the faithful stewards were the ones that were saying, hey, we're gonna invest this. We're going to put it up and then get more back, get a higher return. Obviously, the biggest, difference is with the guy that didn't do anything with it. He buried it in a hole, right? And he was the one who, the master said, you're wicked and lazy, if I remember correctly, just kind of off the top of my head. So it's just like, oh, okay, well, he's bad and he wasn't doing anything. So to me, the main takeaways from that parable is be faithful, take risks, be active, do something, and trust God. How that lines up with effective altruism, I actually think it lines up pretty well in terms of, like, look, you might have 5, you might have 2, but do what you can to multiply it. Like, that's kind of the main thing. So I don't know. That's just kind of at first blush the things that kind of stick out to me comparing the parable. How about you, man?
Yeah, I don't think it's a slam dunk case for effective altruism, because effective altruism has a lot of other common frameworks, like use of careful evidence, especially like randomized control trials, doing kind of A/B tests, having control groups, sussing out the causality. And that's not in the parable of the talents, although we have other parables about shrewdness, right? Like the parable of the shrewd manager, right, who's commended, ends the parable of saying that those of this world are more shrewd than the sons of light, right? And there seems to be some kind of recommendation of the shrewdness of those who grow resources in this world, but he wishes only that sons of light, that followers of God, would be just as shrewd about pursuing God's purposes. So I love Bruce Weiddich's framing of this. He has this book that he came out with called Shrewd Samaritan. How can we be a good Samaritan who's being more impartial, who's loving our global neighbor, but how can we be shrewd about it? We see our book as sort of like a follow-up and a deepening of Bruce Weiddich's book, Shrewd Samaritan.
That's interesting. Yeah, the shrewd manager was always one of those parables that I was like, what on earth is this about? It's always confusing. And then I listened to an episode of the Bible Project and they were breaking it down and I was like, oh, wow. Okay, that's interesting. Like, and you can always turn to those good folks down in Portland for that. Yeah. And we're getting after,
Mackey, yeah.
Oh yeah, Tim Mackey's the greatest. Oh, and by the way, I'm even wearing a Multnomah sweater today. We went to the same school. Yeah, me and the Bible Project guys. So we're getting after some of the the Bible commands.
I should give one more example of an effective.
Oh, go for it, dude.
Really effective thing. So, this is going to be challenging to maybe you or some of your audience, but if we believe that all souls matter to God and the spiritual life of everyone, whether they live in Jerusalem or Judea or the ends of the earth, matters just as much to God, then if we can evangelize faithfully in some place far, far away, or support that evangelism, it matters just as much, as far as I can tell, as similar evangelism happening in our own country or in the United States. It happens to be that currently in the US, it costs roughly $80,000 a year to fund a church planter. But if you look at India, for instance, where it's roughly 1% Christian, although estimates vary, and where the average income is closer to $3,000, it costs roughly $1,000 a year to fund a church planter for an entire year. So for the cost of planting one church in the US, you can plant roughly 80 churches in rural India. And so if, again, you think that our goal is to bring the gospel to the ends of the earth, and you think there's comparable faithfulness and orthodoxy in these groups, then I think that's a good initial reason to support church planting globally and prioritize that over church planting in the US.
Okay, all right. We're pushing some buttons now, JD. I love it. I mean, I'm personally, very someone who's lived overseas for several years and, just has a heart for the global poor and the global church. It definitely tracks with me. Of course, we want people to have fruit in their own backyard and fruit abroad, So I agree, that, church plant in the U.S. is a good thing, obviously, and you're saying, and you recognize that too. But that is an interesting juxtaposition, for sure.
Here's what my wife and I do. So we give an amount to our local church out of respect for the work that they do, and we do, after all, take up a seat in the congregation. But the overwhelming majority of our giving goes to global charities that are working to support the health of those suffering from diseases like malaria or whooping cough. We support global church planters. We're also creation care people, so I care about the suffering of animals on factory farms. So I also give towards similar causes there. But
I love it.
The overwhelming majority is distant from us or global.
Yeah, totally tracking. Guys, the book, just to remind it, is All the Lives You Can Change. Are you playing off of like Peter Singer's book at all by chance? Because he has a very similar title.
That's right. Peter Singer has this book called The Life You Can Save. And our publishers just told us what to call the book. We did not come up with the title.
Okay.
We pushed
All right.
back
Yeah,
against it quite a bit, in fact. Um, yeah.
Okay.
We wanted to call it the purpose or the impact-driven life, but then they told us that, that would riff off the Warren franchise. I'm not convinced. I think purpose-driven or impact-driven life would have been great.
They say we're not going to rip Rick Warren. We're going to rip Peter Singer
We're going to
instead.
rip Peter Singer.
Yeah.
Who has a great thought experiment that really inspired some of this work. Peter Singer, a lot of Christians have, and I do also have difficulty with his views on the unborn. But he has this great thought experiment, which is imagine you're walking home from work one day and you pass by a pond and you're wearing your best suit. You're coming back from a business trip. You have a very fancy suit and you see some splashing in the pond. And you notice it's a child and their parents aren't here. The child is drowning, but it's a shallow pond. So you could easily wade in and scoop the child out. And the question is, should you do it? Should you do it? Even though it would ruin your fancy suit, should you do it? You didn't throw the child in the pond, right? It seems obvious, right? It's obvious you should do it. If this is obvious, why isn't it obvious that we should give some percentage of our income that, like a fancy suit, might cost a couple $1,000s to literally save the life of someone who would die without us? It's not because we threw them in the pond that they're morally relevant. It's not even that they're right in front of us, right? If you could do the same thing for a child drowning in a pond 1,000 miles away, that child matters just as much to God. Peter Singer argues, and I think correctly, that if we care about doing good, we should go and save that child. And so he has a book called The Life You Can Save, arguing that by giving a very small percentage of your income, you can literally save lives. In fact, the average American earning $60,000 a year over a lifetime, giving away 10% of their income to life-saving charities, is going to save over 60 lives over the course of their career. That's 1.5 lives every single year for 40 years of their life. That's 60 lives. I mean, that's an incredible amount of good. If you imagine a bus full of 60 children, right? And it's hurtling off a cliff. It's hurtling off a cliff. And you can pull back the bus with a magic rope that you have. But by pulling, it would cost you 10% of your income. 10% of your income. I can hear the voices in the background, right? Oh, you should give that 10% to your local church, right? Let the bus hurtle off a cliff, right? I can hear the voice. Oh, you're part of other good causes, right? Or you want to use that money to buy a nicer car for your family, right? I don't think that's now some of those are good things to spend money on. Those aren't great reasons for not pulling back that bus full of children. That's the kind of opportunity that we have in front of us that effective altruism makes clear. And it takes, critical thinkers like Peter Singer to force it to our consideration.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Now, one of the things, and you kind of described this with how you and your wife decide on who you're going to give to. There are some, I've been going through the book. I really like a lot of the content you guys are describing, and there's also some kind of helpful frameworks, that you guys touch on in the book, and I think you guys touch on with Christians for Impact as well, including what you guys call the ITN framework. I don't know if this is original to you guys or what have you, but I thought it was a pretty interesting way to kind of compare and contrast opportunities for investment, whether that's financial investment or whether that's vocational investment. Can you walk us through the ITN framework?
Yeah, ITN stands for importance. That's the importance of a problem, how many people it affects and how much it affects them. Tractability, T, that's how solvable a problem is. If you throw a given amount of resources, time and money at the problem, how much is it going to alleviate the problem? And then neglectedness. Given how important and solvable something is something actually going on, right? Are people actually addressing the issue, or is it relatively marginalized? And so problems that are urgent, that are pressing, that are worth prioritizing with your career and with your money are usually problems that are high in one or a combination of these things. They're highly important, they're highly tractable, and they're highly neglected. We can take issues today that people care about, like homelessness in Western countries. It's an important problem. There are millions of people suffering from homelessness in the US, Canada, Great Britain, if you combine them all. And it's a severe problem, right? It's often joined by conditions like mental health issues, deep feelings of despair, of loneliness, of feeling worthless, of spiritual neglect, of health problems. Now, is it solvable? it's quite complicated actually to solve. It's anyone who's worked in a homeless ministry sees the difficulty. Now it's not hard to show kindness and compassion towards a homeless person, but to really solve the problem, to really fix homelessness, that's hard to do. I mean, in the U.S., we already spend across our social services $10,000 per person per year if you add up all of our social services, and we still have many homeless persons or unhoused persons. Sorry, is it neglected? Again, we have about $10,000 per person in social services per year. Recently in the news, I think it came out that New York City was spending upwards of, I'm not sure what the number was, like $60,000 or $80,000 per year in its homelessness budget, which is an extreme amount of money to throw at this. And yet we still have many people who are unhoused. This is a problem that does not rank very highly in ITN. Compare this to somebody who's suffering from extreme global poverty, living under $2.20 a day. There are over 600 million people, right? Hundreds of times as many people suffering from this problem as a problem like unhoused persons. In terms of tractability, how solvable is it to help people living in extreme poverty? Well, we know a lot of things don't work. We know we shouldn't just hand out shoes, but we do know that by providing cash transfers, by providing microloans, providing certain kinds of education, by providing certain healthcare programs, we know how to help people. And about $400 per year can lift somebody out of extreme poverty. Give Directly has found that and has done it for millions of people. How neglected is it? Well, USAID, formerly the world's biggest aid organization, $60 billion a year, right? Which basically no longer exists. When that was around, if you averaged out that funding across the 600 million people living in extreme poverty, that was $100 per person per year. $100 per person per year in extreme poverty. That's 100 times less funding than the US spends on those in need of social services in the US, right? So here we have a problem that is it affects 100 times as many people. We know how to solve it. And the funding, even before USAID's crash, was 100 times less. To me, it just seems overwhelmingly more urgent. So ITN framework that we propose in this book, which we cite from 80,000 Hours, they're the ones who coined this framework. It's a tool that helps us see these really outstanding opportunities for doing good, and especially for choosing careers. So if you're wondering, what career should I pursue and what problems should I tackle with my career? I think it's one of the most important questions you can ask yourself is like, if I wasn't here at my job, would the world really be any worse off, right? Or if I am doing this job, what kind of good am I doing in the world? What kind of problems am I tackling in the world? If you're asking that question, how can I tackle the most important problems with my career? Ask yourself, well, how does it rank on ITN? Like if you're working as a dentist or a vet or an aid worker, like what are the problems you're helping at the end of the day? And chances are, if you're tackling one of these highly important, tractable, neglected problems, you're going to have much more impact on average.
All right, so let's cut to the chase then, JD. Let's say that you're talking with somebody, and you guys have on Christians for Impact, you guys have a number of these, global causes listed, and then of course you're touching on them in the book as well. What are the top ones? Like, if you were to invest either your vocation or X amount of dollars, you're going to get the most impact by investing in these 2 or 3 causes. What kind of ranks high from your guys's application of this framework?
We have 4 categories of problems that rank the highest in our tier list. On tier 1, we have extreme global poverty and health, right? Tackling preventable diseases like malaria, trachoma, also helping people living in extreme poverty. We also have missions, people who are suffering from spiritual darkness, who don't know the love of God in Christ for them, right? There's billions of people that don't fully know that, right? And most of the people that we can serve at the lowest costs are actually in the 1040 window. So missions in neglected regions, that's also up there. Third, causes regarding the cruel treatment of animals, especially on factory farms. There are 80 billion animals estimated to live on factory farms, and many of them die every single year. Most of them live in horrendous conditions that if it was in our own house, it'd be considered animal cruelty. You'd be arrested for breaking the law. But because we do it to animals on the scales of billions, it's overlooked. And then fourth, we have problems of potentially catastrophic risks of AI going misaligned. For instance, using AI for nuclear launch codes that might launch a preemptive strike, or pandemics, right? You have emerging pandemics that could be worse than COVID. We actually know how to develop those in labs now. It's a terrible problem that AI is only going to make worse. So those are the four main problems that we put in the tier one that people should tackle with their careers.
Oh boy, that's interesting. Okay, well, first of all, on extreme poverty and missions and how those are largely the same group, I think I think that's going to resonate with a lot of our listeners because those are two things that we talk about regularly. And one of the reasons that we talk, again, from Rene Padilla's integral mission frame understanding is a holistic gospel is going to address both of those things together, right? So I really kind of resonate with that. The animal one, I mean, I'll just be honest, we do not touch on that very often. And I'm wondering, so I say this in the midst of Lent. We are recording in the last week of Lent, and I have been doing a Daniel fast. So I'm on a plant-based diet right now, but I'm also a California guy that loves In-N-Out burgers. Are you vegan? Is that part of your
part of my
your
Anabaptist roots? In
activism?
fact, I
Okay.
went vegetarian because I
Okay.
asked myself, how can I reflect the nonviolence and the self-giving love of Jesus in every area of my life, including my diet?
Yeah.
And I heard Greg Boyd make this great argument that in Eden it was vegetarian or vegan. In the eschaton, in the visions of the new heavens and new earth in Isaiah, we read of the wolf laying with the lamb, and we hear a description of it in Revelations 22, that there'll be no more suffering, death, or pain. And Jesus says that we should love others like he loves us. So what does it look like to love like Jesus, also in light of the vegetarian Egan and the vegetarian eschaton, with no more suffering, death, or pain? I don't need to eat animals to survive. I can be totally healthy. My doctor says I have too much protein. You might not see it on my on my arms, but you can live even healthier. Most people have too much meat. It's also better for the global poor to eat a vegetarian diet, as the Mennonites have always found. So why are we lying to ourselves and saying that this isn't a Christian problem? This is absolutely a Christian problem. And so if we can move in a plant-based direction, that's good for ourselves, it's good for animals, it's good for the planet and for the poor.
Okay. Wow. All right. There's a whole other podcast right there because I have not dove into that too much, and that is interesting. It's funny because I was talking with Dr. Laura Horvath recently, and we were talking about orphan care, but I mentioned this whole documentary Cowspiracy, which I watched several years ago, which was a Netflix documentary. Have you seen that?
I avoid the documentaries.
You avoid documentaries.
I read the statements of how animals are treated on industrial farms. And I
Right.
visit
Okay.
them.
Yeah. Anyways, they had a similar outlook. Not a Christian resource, but okay, that's interesting. And then the AI one, that is interesting. What can somebody even do about that? It feels like AI is something that so one of the thing is tractability. I'm looking here. You have AI. Let me find it. Tractability is medium. What can an average person do? Because AI is, they say it's here, and we've talked about AI, multiple episodes on Think Global Do Justice. But it seems like in terms of like if they're going to have access to, nuclear codes, or they're going to, have swarms of AI drones that, can decimate a city. Like when we talk about that AI and warfare, that seems like what can someone like me, I'm also a believer in Christian nonviolence, but it's like, what's someone like me that can do? That seems like the decision is up to, people like Sam Altman and people like heads of state, or like legislators. Like, how is that tractable?
I recommend checking out our website. We have a list of all the things you can do for each of these problem areas that we recommend are really high impact. But because you might not make it there yet, for AI, there's a lot you can do. So there's currently roughly 500 people in the world that control these AIs. And you might think like, well, that's not many people. I'm not one of them. You can become one of them. Right now, we're in this golden window of, for instance, policy opportunities to decide how we as a nation want to determine the future of AI for our children, for our nation, for our common good and our welfare. And that can be done through acts of Congress, through the democratic consent of the governed through policy and committees on the Hill. There are fellowships that individuals who have any kind of technical background can do, like the Horizon Policy Fellowship or like Tech Congress. These will pay you for a year to go volunteer your services in a congressional committee and actually work on these issues in Congress. Now, if you have the technical ability, I don't think the people listening to this podcast are like probably the technical programmers at Anthropic or OpenAI, but you can certainly work there and try to influence it from the inside. I think the best thing that most individuals have to do for influencing the future of AI is helping us set red lines for AIs so that, as was banned currently, actually just last year, companies don't have free reign to use AI, for instance, to create deepfake pornography of our children. Or, as has currently been in the news lately, AI won't be used to automate mass surveillance on US citizens or autonomously make decisions to take human life or launch nuclear weapons. Again, what can individuals do? Well, you can join cohorts of groups working on this in DC. I'm well connected with several of them. And you can apply for advising, one-on-one advising through Christians for Impact. We've talked to people about this every single day, in fact.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And that's one of the reasons I appreciate your guys' work at Christians for Impact is the opportunity to have a partner, in thinking through this stuff. So yeah, really great resources. JD, I got just one last question for you, and it kind of ties back into something I ask our guests regularly, but also, something that is found in the book, and it's around, there is all sorts of evil and suffering and out there. But what are the opportunities, and if there was one thing that you would recommend people do, a Christian, to affect the poor or to help, their global neighbor, what would be that one thing that you would recommend that they do?
The one thing that every Christian can do to make a maximum impact on the world is donate 10% or more of your income, perhaps on top of what you're giving to your local church, to the world's most effective charities, treating and preventing malaria, whooping cough, tuberculosis. Now, the average person doing this over a lifetime will save a busload of kids. And it doesn't matter, if that's not emotionally resonant to you. It is to me. It's super exciting to me. That would be a beautiful and wonderful thing. That might be the most impactful thing you did with your life. If that was all you did, was donate 10% of your income to a GiveWell recommended charity and save dozens of children's lives. Children that matter to God. Children as important to God as your kid or mine. And that's quite easy to do. We'd be just as happy, many of us, perhaps happier, trusting God with 90% of our income than living on 100% of it. I know many of the listeners of this podcast work in the charity sector, work in this space. Maybe you would actually consider leaving your current work for something that's higher paying, if that makes it possible for you to donate more. If you're not currently having a big impact where you are, you're feeling disgruntled or unsure of the impact of your current nonprofit, I wouldn't recommend that for everybody, but consider ways that you can actually earn more in order to give more away and do it responsibly, right? Don't lie, cheat, or steal to do this. There's bad examples of this, but Jesus calls us to give an account of everything we've been given and to use it for the good of others and to honor him. So donate 10% to effective charities. I think that's single-handedly the best thing you can do.
I love it, man. I'm all for it. Again, guys, today we've been talking with JD Bauman. The book is All the Lives You Can Change. What's the release date for this? I think it's April what?
April 28th. You can
April
get it on
28th.
Amazon, or you can get the introduction for free on our website at christiansforimpact.org.
Okay, so April 28th. So right now you can go and get the book. We really appreciate your time, JD. Thanks so much for jumping in and sharing with us about the book and the work. You've given us a lot to think about, certainly in regards to effective altruism. So appreciate your time today, bro.
Thank you, Brandon.
And for our listeners, may Almighty God, who created us in his own image, grant us grace to fearlessly contend against evil and to make no peace with oppression, that we may reverently use our freedom and employ it in the maintenance of justice in our communities and among the nations, to the glory of God's holy name, through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen, and we will catch you guys on the next episode of Think Global, Do Justice.